Geisha are some of the most mythologized women in Japanese history. Surrounded by mystery, beauty, and endless misconceptions. And today, I invite you to become one of them, just for a day, and discover what their life was really like. Do geishas sell love? How many years would you have to study to become a geisha? Why did geishas have bald spots on the crowns of their heads, and why did they blacken their teeth? And how much did these legendary Japanese beauties actually earn from their art? All this, and much more, in today's video. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. You might be thinking that on our imaginary time machine, we've just travelled deep into ancient history, say, all the way back to the 7th century, when the samurai movement first emerged. But in reality, the art of the geisha, or geiko as they're sometimes called, isn't nearly that ancient. It appeared only in the 17th century. And yes, I'm not mistaken when I call it art, because the very word geisha is made up of two characters, meaning person and art. And yet, largely thanks to memoirs of a geisha, many people believe that what these women did was nothing more than an elite form of selling themselves to men. But that simply isn't true. Geishas were, and still are, guardians of traditional Japanese arts, and it was through these arts that they entertained their guests. The myth of their supposed promiscuity emerged after World War II, when Americans stationed in Japan were eager for exotic pleasures and encounters with local culture. They mistook any woman in a kimono for a geisha, and after returning home, they spread these stories further. And of course, the famous film based on that book only reinforced this myth in the public consciousness. So today, as you're about to live a day as a geisha, don't worry. You definitely won't have to sleep with anyone for money. You're entering a world of art. When you think of geishas, what comes to mind? Beautiful women in kimonos gracefully dancing beneath blooming cherry blossoms. Well, here comes another surprise. The very first geishas were actually men. They were kabuki theatre actors who played musical instruments and entertained people during tea ceremonies. Something like elegant entertainers of the past. But once women entered this art, they quickly pushed men out. Interestingly, this might be one of the very few areas in history where that happened. Usually, it was the other way around. Men pushed women out of professions that became profitable and prestigious. The golden age of geishas came in the 1860s, when the company of these women was so highly desired that they became the very center of Japan's cultural and social life. So go ahead. Imagine that you found yourself in Japan in the year 1860. So, what did you actually need to become a geisha? Well, first of all, a lot. And I mean a lot of studying. Training began very early, in early childhood. Girls as young as 6 years old would leave their homes and move into geisha communities called hanamachi. At the head of each community was usually an experienced, mature woman, Oka-san. She was considered the mistress of the house and acted almost like an agent, organizing events, managing schedules, and quite literally introducing the girls to society. Young girls who were still in training and not yet geishas were called maiko. And the moment a girl entered a geisha house, she received a new name. For example, the famous geisha Mineko Iwasaki was called Masako in her childhood. You might not believe it, but the training of future geishas was incredibly intense. So intense, in fact, that after World War II, the rules were revised. Today, training usually begins at the age of 15. Calligraphy, ikebana, the art of holding a conversation on any topic. Creating a pleasant atmosphere at a banquet. Dance, playing traditional musical instruments. All of this took 5 to 7 years, longer than some people spend at university. And that wasn't even everything. A professional geisha had to be well educated, so girls also attended regular school alongside their training. Usually, geishas chose one particular art and focused on perfecting it above all else. But even if you learned to dance beautifully and pour tea flawlessly, you were still expected to go through a kind of apprenticeship. For several years, you would simply observe experienced geishas during events, and only then would you be allowed to make your debut. Still not as a full geisha, but as a student. To become a true geisha, you had to be experienced enough and pass a special ritual called erikai, the changing of the collar. Instead of the embroidered red and white collar worn by apprentices, you would receive a simple white collar on your underkimono. And only then would you finally be considered a full-fledged geisha. Agree, this was clearly not a quick process. Naturally, enormous amounts of money were spent on education and upkeep, so there was a contract between the girl and the community. A geisha couldn't simply leave. She first had to repay everything that had been invested in her. How long did that usually take? Up to 10 years, depending on her skill and popularity. After that, a geisha could choose: continue working and living in the house, move out and work independently, or leave the profession altogether. And of course, she could also get married. Geishas were considered very desirable brides, well-educated, beautiful, and surrounded by a wide circle of fascinating connections. But for you, the training is already behind you. Today, you're a real geisha, so what would your day actually look like? If you thought geishas did nothing but lounge on cushions and sip sake all day, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. Their mornings usually started between 8 and 10 a.m, and they worked until 2 or even 3 in the morning, as long as the men's gatherings lasted. Their entire day was filled with lessons and constant rehearsals. Remember when I said training lasted 5 to 7 years? In reality, it never truly ended. Every single day, you had to polish your skills to perfection. In the second half of the day, geishas were introduced to the list of guests they would entertain that evening and prepared carefully for conversation. For example, if a diplomat or a politician was attending, they would study his field of work and read the latest news. The goal was simple: to learn as much as possible about the client in order to keep a conversation that genuinely interested him. So, evening arrives, and it's time to get ready for work. First of all, make sure to eat well. At banquets, geishas were not allowed to have dinner. At most, they could drink something. Next, a visit to the hairdresser. Your hair would be turned into an incredibly complex structure made of real hair pieces, and decorative pins. The hairstyle was heavy and elaborate, pulled tightly upward, and to preserve it overnight, you had to sleep on a lacquered wooden board so it wouldn't get ruined. To train you to stay still while sleeping, rice would be sprinkled into your hair, so you'd immediately notice if you moved. Honestly, it sounds more like a nightmare for anyone who enjoys curling up comfortably in bed. But losing sleep wasn't the only problem. In the long run, you could lose your hair as well. Because the hair was pulled so tightly at the top of the head, years of wearing this hairstyle often led to hair loss and bald spots on the crown. And to fully match the beauty standards of a proper geisha, you would have to go through 2 more procedures. The face was whitened using cosmetics that contained lead, clearly not the healthiest thing for the skin. By the way, the desire for pale skin in Japan hasn't disappeared and still exists today. Second, blackening your teeth. The tradition of blackening teeth was called ohaguro. It involved mixtures made from herbal juices, resin, and soot, and people genuinely believed this compound strengthened the teeth. This practice was widespread, from commoners all the way to members of the imperial family, until in the early 20th century, the Japanese emperor finally banned it. And of course, don't forget to paint your lips with a special bright red lipstick. Now it's finally time to put on the kimono. The kimono was the most important attribute of a true geisha. In fact, it wasn't just clothing. It was a work of art on fabric, hand-painted and incredibly detailed. The price of a single kimono could be equal to the cost of an entire house. A geisha couldn't dress herself. Putting on a kimono was a whole ritual, almost an art form in itself. The full outfit could weigh up to 20 kilograms, and the most important element, the obi belt was usually tied at the back. And this was the key visual difference between a real geisha and, for example, a Japanese courtesan pretending to be one. Women of the oldest profession wore their kimono tied at the front, so it could be undone quickly. A true geisha, on the other hand, couldn't undress on her own. Now imagine having to move in such an outfit, and sometimes even dance. And on your feet, instead of comfortable flats, you'd be wearing special platform shoes called okobo, a kind of wooden sandal with a 10 to 15 centimetre platform. You'd have to balance on them carefully and under no circumstances fall. So, do you think you could manage that? And now, when you're finally ready, it's time to welcome your guests. Usually, the guests came to the geisha districts themselves, and more rarely the women would travel by invitation to the clients' locations. These gatherings most often took place in traditional tea houses. Of course, geishas were commissioned mainly by men. Women technically could do the same, but in reality they almost never did. That's because the structure of Japanese family life was very different from what we're used to in Europe. Wealthy Japanese men didn't spend their leisure time at balls or horse races. Instead, they visited the geisha quarters, where they enjoyed fine food and were entertained by these beautiful women through conversation, dance, and performances on traditional musical instruments. It was believed that there should be no jealousy between a wife and a geisha, because a geisha was exclusively about preserving tradition. But honestly, I'd still feel hurt if my husband left the house to spend the evening in the company of another woman. And it was probably even more painful for Japanese wives when their husbands became official patrons of a geisha. So tonight, try to be especially charming, because it wouldn't hurt if you managed to secure a sponsor. A sponsor was usually a wealthy man, because being a geisha was an expensive pleasure. One kimono alone, as you remember, cost an astronomical amount of money. For a man, supporting a geisha was a clear sign of status and wealth. Did you have to enter into any kind of relationship with your sponsor? Absolutely not. Yes, romantic relationships could happen, but that had nothing to do with the profession. That was private life. And of course, romances do tend to happen at work, especially when you're a young woman surrounded by men. Selling sex for money was forbidden for geishas. While it may have existed at some point in the past, a special ban was later introduced. Geishas are also sometimes associated with a ritual of selling one's virginity, but this was typically practiced by Japanese courtesans, not geishas. Everything else is, once again, most likely the invention of a famous film. So how long could you actually work as a geisha? There were no strict age limits for geishas, but of course the spotlight and the highest fees usually went to young beauties. And speaking of fees, they varied depending on your appearance, your talent, and your ability to entertain guests. For example, Minako Iwasaki, whose life story inspired memoirs of a geisha and who later sued the author for defamation, earned around $500,000 a year at the peak of her career. Within the community, geishas had an internal ranking. The head of the house usually announced it publicly, and naturally, being the highest paid geisha was a great honor. Which is why this environment often turned into a real snake pit full of intrigue. Women would slip glass shards and needles into each other's clothes, spread rumors about one another. But honestly, this was hardly about the geisha profession itself. It was more likely just a problem of any highly competitive environment where women are forced to live within it. Just like, for example, in harems, which I talked about in one of my previous videos. So, would you agree to become a geisha? If this idea suddenly sounds appealing to you, keep in mind, it's actually possible. Even today, a foreign woman can study and become a geisha. Yes, you'd have to change your name and go through long, demanding training, but it is possible. Being a geisha is still considered a very prestigious and successful career for a woman in Japan. In fact, they are businesswomen in their own right. And the demand for the company of a geisha has not disappeared, even today. So, who knows, maybe some interesting career prospects await you. And even if you're not ready for a new profession, if you ever find yourself in Japan, don't forget to visit the geisha districts. Just be careful of imitations. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and tell me in the comments, would you like to live a day as a geisha? See you in the next video.